It's about an hour before sunrise, and you're lying on a flat mud brick roof, head on a small wooden rest, the air still cool from the night. Under you, the village is a low, breathing tangle of reed mats, pottery, and smoke. Dogs stir. Somewhere, a donkey brays. The Nile is a pale ribbon on the horizon, and the smell of damp earth and baking clay hangs in the air. This is how many Egyptians began their day, not in palaces or on grand causeways, but on roofs that keep houses dry and give a last hint of breeze before the sun climbs. So, what did an Egyptian do from dawn until night? The short answer is a lot of ordinary things that look surprisingly familiar. Wake, eat, work, rest, laugh, grieve, argue, write small, useful notes. The longer answer asks us to listen to the scraps they left behind. Notes written on broken pottery, a logbook from a limestone transport crew, a papyrus that records a labor stoppage. Those bits, along with skeletons, tomb paintings, and the river itself, let us reconstruct a day woven into seasons, state systems, and simple human needs. The real clock in ancient Egypt was not a wall of numbers, but the Nile, its annual cycle, Akhet, the flood, Pere, emergence and planting, and Shemu, harvest, organized work and life. During Akhet, fields were underwater and many men were available for state projects. In Pere, they hurried to plant as the waters receded. In Shemu, they harvested and transported grain. If you lived on the edge of this calendar, your day began at first light. Heavy labor was done before noon. As the sun rose, people slowed and sheltered in shade. Nights were a different rhythm entirely. 12 hours of darkness broken by stars and the low light of oil lamps, but the daytime was where the work and the bargaining took place. You push yourself up off the roof as the horizon paler. Your first real meal is both breakfast and rations, bread and beer. That pairing was the backbone of everyday Egyptian food, dense, gritty loaves and a sour, nutritious brew. Beer and bread functioned like a single system. They fed families. They were used to calculate wages, and they were part of state provision for workers. The bread contains grit because millstones ground grain with stone. Over time, that sand wears down teeth. If you look at skeletal remains from Egypt, you see the result. Severe dental attrition, exposed pulp cavities, and even dental abscesses. The famous mummified pharaoh Ramesses II shows a severe tooth wear too. Sand in bread is one reason why dentists of the ancient world were busy. After that, your morning splits depending on your job. Imagine yourself taking one of four paths. One path leads to the fields. As a peasant farmer, you carry a small wooden yoke or head basket and head toward the irrigation channels. If it's Peret, you sow. If it's Shemu, you harvest. You may operate a shaduf, the counterweighted pole used to lift water from canals into basins, its rhythm creaking against the silence. Farming is repetitive, ruled by the seasons and by the state tax demands. Inspectors measure yields and record payments. Most of your day is exposed to sun and mud, and your hands and knees will show it later in life. Joint changes and calluses tell that story in bones. Another path takes you to a quarry road. If you're one of the crews recorded by Merer, you're part of a chain that hold limestone from quarries to the Giza Plateau. The Merer papyri are extraordinary. A set of papyrus logbooks from around 2560 BC in which an inspector named Merer recorded daily runs, who rode, where the cargo went, where the crew stayed. These papers don't sound glamorous, but they are the closest thing we have to an ancient project's daily diary. They show organized transport, routine provisioning, and a bureaucracy that accounted for men and materials day by day. When you read Merer's short entries, you feel the rhythm of someone crossing the river repeatedly, recording the mundane facts that made the pyramid complex possible. A third line is life inside a worker's village like Deir el Medina. These were the men who carved and decorated royal tombs on the west bank of Thebes. Deir el Medina is archaeology's gold mine for everyday voices because its houses produced thousands of ostraca, broken pottery, and limestone flakes used as the scrap paper. On those shards, people recorded attendance, sent short notes, scribbled receipts, wrote love poems, joked, and complained about rations. An attendance list might show that a man named Pendua is absent because he's sick. while another ostrakon notes that someone missed work because of beer. One famously dry line on an ostrakon can read like a modern Slack note. Complaints about being late, about payments not arriving, even the occasional note that someone showed up hungover. These texts give an intimacy that tomb walls never could. The fourth path is more urban and administrative, the scribe's route. A scribe could ascend socially because literacy was powerful. Scribes kept accounts, recorded legal agreements, and wrote letters. You could be the clerk who inventories grain, writes the shipment order, or records a lawyerly contract for a woman who needs to attend to her property. Scribes were trained in hieratic script and could move among households and temples, providing a kind of social mobility that is visible in the archaeological record. Women shaped daily life too. They turned the quernstone, grinding grain into flour, a repetitive upper arm strengthening labor that shows up in skeletons as muscle attachments. Women managed households, participated in markets, ran businesses, and had legal standing in many contexts. They could own property, conclude contracts, and represent themselves in court. Their world combined domestic labor with surprising legal agency. That doesn't mean equality in the modern sense, but it does mean women's roles were central and legally recognized in concrete ways. No matter your job, a midday pause is common. The sun is high, the heat oppressive in the floodplain. People sheltered, drank beer or watered barley, and took care of hygiene. Bathing could be daily for some. Evidence from tomb scenes and texts suggests regular washing plus cosmetics such as oils and kohl. Kohl, black pigment around the eyes, has a strong cultural role. It reduced glare, reinforced social identity, and some scholars have suggested antimicrobial or insect deterrent properties. Recent studies propose that copper compounds in some kohl formulas could have fought infection, but that remains interpretive. It's an elegant hypothesis, not a settled fact. The archaeological and chemical evidence invites us to consider kohl both as fashion and as medicine, possibly both at once. Around midday, children return from chores, older men rest, and some workers return to site kitchens for lunch of bread and beer. If you're at Deir el Medina, you might find a communal bakery or brewery where rations are prepared. The state organized provisions. Workers received allocations of grain and bread that were essential to their subsistence. Those rations are what led, centuries later, to a very human bureaucratic crisis. Imagine a winter when grain deliveries are delayed. People wait, hunger rises, tempers fray. At the end of the New Kingdom, in 1157 BC, an extraordinary text documents what happened when provisioning failed, the Turin Strike Papyrus. The record tells of workers who refused to go out to work because deliveries of grain had not arrived. It's often described as the first recorded labor strike. The text lays bare a pragmatic negotiation. Workers expected their rations, and when they didn't get them, they would not work. It is an act of collective bargaining by people who understood their leverage. The papyrus shows that ancient labor was neither simply coerced nor freely chosen. It operated within expectations, rights, and complaints that were bureaucratically visible. Back in the afternoon, tasks resume. Farmers return to tend animals or mend baskets. Work crews finish the day's quota of stone blocks or paint a tomb's final plaster. At Deir el Medina, scribes and foremen record absences and deaths on ostraca. The village produces notes like a modern office. X owes Y bread. Z absent due to festival, returned at dusk. Those scraps survive because pottery and limestone sherds are hard. Mud bricks, matting, and papyrus often do not. This is the material bias of archaeology. What lasts is what we find. Stone lasts. Mud and cloth rot. Tombs made of stone outlive the village houses of mud brick, and because tombs are meant to be permanent, our image of Egypt skews toward funerary monuments. But the everyday was stitched from fragile materials, which is why these broken notes feel like a direct line to ordinary lives. Evening arrives, and with it, leisure and domestic scenes. People play senet, a board game that appears in tomb paintings and on small game boards recovered archaeologically. Households exchange gossip, children run with toys, women might tend small business or visit the market, men and women sing, recite poetry, or exchange playful notes. The ostraca include love poems and joking messages. Wine was rarer than beer, but present at feasts. Drinking could cause hangovers, and yes, some attendance lists have entries that read like modern HR problems, absent due to being drunk, or came late because of a hangover. Human foibles are the same across millennia. Night in an Egyptian village is often spent on rooftops again. The breeze cools, stars wheel above, and insects murmur. Wooden headrests are small, practical pillows that keep the hair free from lice and help with posture. Sleeping on roofs also offered a layer of security. Houses could be closed up, livestock tended within, and roof sleeping meant easy surveillance of the house below. Three pieces of hard evidence anchor this ordinary day and shape our interpretation. First, the ostraca from Deir el Medina. Thousands of scraps survive. Attendance lists, IOUs, graffiti, personal notes. These are not formulaic high literature. They are the sticky, human residue of daily life. They tell us who went to work, who was sick, who borrowed grain, who wrote love lines. They even preserve the occasional disgruntled remark about rations and supplies. Second, the Turin strike papyrus, which records the labor strike when rations failed. It demonstrates workers asserting rights in a bureaucratic system. And third, the Merer papyri, which reads like a logistics notebook showing repeated daily runs transporting limestone to Giza. Together, these documents move us from impression to specificity. Labor was organized, provisioning mattered, and the state kept accounts. If you listen to bones as well as scraps, the body adds more detail. Skeletal analysis shows heavy wear in those who ground grain or handled repetitive tasks, joint disease in older laborers, and dental erosion from gritty bread. The bodies shape the story. The marks of hard repetitive labor, the traces of injury and healing, and sometimes the signs of care. Healed fractures that suggest someone received assistance, not abandonment. Putting it all together yields three cautious but robust conclusions. 1. Egyptian labor, especially for monument building and state projects, was organized and provisioned. The Merer papyri and administrative texts show that crews had inspectors, recorded runs, and received supplies. That doesn't erase hardship or coercion, but it complicates the old image of an army of slaves building wonders. The evidence indicates a system of drew men into seasonal or corvée labor, provisioned by the state, with contracts, wages sometimes paid in food, and at least some recourse when provisions failed. 2. Everyday life was textured and human. People played games, wrote jokes, drank beer, loved and argued. The ostraca show love poems sitting alongside ration lists and petty complaints. The small things, who slept where, who missed work for a festival, who borrowed a few loaves, are the details that make ancient people feel close to us. They are not abstractions, but messy, embodied human lives. 3. What survives biases our picture. Stone endures, mud brick decays. Papyrus is fragile. Tombs were meant to last, so they dominate our imagination. Yet the most intimate records were often fragile, and when these survive, we glimpse ordinary life. If we had more of those fragile things, daily lists, household letters, the story of ancient Egypt might look even less monumental and more domestic. Ask yourself, what do we discard today that an archaeologist would wish for in 3,000 years? A grocery list? A sticky note? A group chat screenshot? These would change the way future people see us. The same is true for ancient Egypt. We have grand stone, but we also have the occasional scrap that flips our assumptions. There are smaller, humane details that make these people vivid. The Deir el Medina ostraca record a man named Amenacht complaining about unpaid rations. Another note lists workers absent because they were at a festival. One person scribbles a short poem that looks like teasing flirtation. The attendance registers contain names like Seba and Apeti. The Merer logbooks record Merer's daily route. Ankaf appears in administrative records related to Giza. These names are anchors in a sea of otherwise anonymous lives, real people who left ordinary traces. We should be cautious about asserting motivations or feelings with certainty. Scholars suggest that coal could have had medical benefits because some formulas contain copper compounds that may reduce infection. Others emphasize its cosmetic and cultural roles. It's a plausible and fascinating argument, not a settled verdict. And when we read about the Turin strike, we should not romanticize the workers as modern labor activists. They operated in a different legal and social world. Yet their action, refusing work when rations failed, reads like a timeless, practical response to a common problem. If you are not fed, you cannot work. What did an Egyptian do from dawn until night? They lived the day shaped by the Nile and by the season, rising on a roof or in a courtyard, taking bread and beer as the day's fuel, moving into a rhythm of labor that matched crop cycles and state needs, pausing at midday for rest and hygiene, returning to work, and finally gathering for play or family at dusk. Some worked fields, some sculpted in stone, some wrote the accounts, women ground grain and conducted business, scribes recorded the transactions and disputes that kept the system running. There is also humor and frustration baked into the day. A broken pot may hold a complaint about a late delivery. A short note could record a man's absence due to a hangover. An inspector like Merer records the routine and sometimes hints at small delays and adjustments. Even a pharaoh's teeth can tell a personal story about diet and daily life. The archaeological record is at once mundane and miraculous. Mundane by what it records, miraculous that it survived at all. If you think about work patterns, you might ask about rest. The Deir el Medina calendar suggests a rhythm that is neither an endless grind nor pure leisure, a 10-day cycle often broken into 8 days on and 2 days off. Workers received leave for festivals and had sick days noted in registers. That pattern implies an expectation of rest and a communal life woven of ritual and repayment. It also suggests a social contract. The state provided some protection and provision, but the laborer still bore hard physical costs. At night, you climb back onto your roof. The village settles. The Nile whispers. You think about the small clay scrap you tucked into your tunic that morning, a note to a colleague or a list of bread owed. These are the objects that survive to speak across millennia. They tell us that the ancient Egyptian was not an abstraction, but someone who worried about rations, joked with friends, quarreled over pay, and loved. So the answer to the question in the title is not a single neat sentence. A day in ancient Egypt was a mosaic. Dawn on a cool roof, bread and beer to start, labor shaped by season and job, a midday break for washing and rest, afternoons finishing tasks or traveling quarry roads, evenings of games, gossip and family, and nights spent under the stars once more. The specifics depended on whether you were a farmer, a craftsman at Deir el Medina, a scribe, or a woman running a household. The documents, Ostraka, the Turin Strike Papyrus, the Merer logbooks, give us the scaffolding to say this with some confidence. Bones and teeth fill in the bodily costs. And the bias of survival explains why we have so many monuments but are always delighted when a humble scrap turns up to show us the rest of the picture. Would you trade your weekend for an 8 on, 2 off schedule paid in bread and beer? Tell us below. When you walk away from this reconstruction, carry 2 things with you. First, that ordinary daily life matters. It is the slow engine of history, and the smallest notes can change our judgments about the past. Second, that archaeology is as much about what is missing as what is found. Mud brick houses rot away. The stone remains dominate the landscape of memory. But when a scrap of pottery survives, when a papyrus recounts a missed delivery, when a logbook lists a run to Giza, we hear a human voice across 3,000 years saying, "I worked today, I ate, I complained, I loved." So, what did an Egyptian do from dawn until night? They lived in the fullest, most stubbornly human way. They woke in the cool air before sunrise, ate bread and beer, followed the river's calendar into work or craft, took their rest at midday, returned to family and games at evening, and slept on the roof under a sky that has not changed much in thousands of years. If you want to dive deeper, there's more to read about Deir el Medina's Ostraka, the Turin Strike Papyrus, and the Merer Papyri. Each of those texts turns a shadowy outline into a detailed human day. If this glimpse into daily life brought you closer to ancient people, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to see more reconstructions of the ordinary moments behind grand monuments.